Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Very exciting day. I know a lot of people couldn't make it in office today, but at least it's a great milestone that we do have Rabbi Mordechai Lightstone in office, hopefully the first of many times. Throughout all of COVID and being remote, we had a lot of discussions virtually, so it's really great that he's able to make it in office. I'm very bitter that I wasn't able to be there today, but the next one, 100%, I'll camp out the night before. We have a lot of different topics depending on the time of the year, and then this time with Tisha B'Av coming up, Rabbi offered to have a relevant conversation that he'll walk us all through. I think we're going to do about 30 minutes of a discussion and kind of leading through this conversation, this presentation, and then we're going to go 15-minute Q&A.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here in person, to finally meet Talia in person, and be able to present a talk to Google from Google. So this talk is a very interesting one, none the least because Rick kind of said, you want to talk about Tisha B'Av, which is traditionally the saddest day on the Jewish calendar, and therefore one that I try and kind of not think about until it's right beforehand and not focus on it. But of course, it is a Jewish day. It's not a holiday per se. It's a fast day, and it's an important day on the calendar, and therefore it's really worth looking into it and seeing the lessons we can learn from this particular day, this fast day, and how we can kind of apply it to our daily lives today in a way that I think speaks very broadly to every single person when kind of explored and unpacked. So to that extent, Tisha B'Av is the day that commemorates many tragic days in the Jewish calendar, the destruction of the two holy temples in Jerusalem. These were kind of the center, the epicenter of Jewish life, of religious practice and social life, and everything kind of took place around the temples. So when they were destroyed, it was obviously a huge catastrophic event, besides all the loss of life and then exile and things that were experienced in the destruction. And there are other tragic days throughout the years that kind of always seem to come around this time. The expulsion from Spain in 1492 took place on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av. World War I broke out on Tisha B'Av, and I think the liquidation of the Lodz Ghetto or one of these other dates also happened during World War II, and it's just not a very happy time. But what I think is pertinent to us and what we're going to focus on this conversation, and it's very much a conversation where I'm going to try and share what I was able to explore, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, is this idea about when is it necessary to speak up. As we'll see, the story that the sages of the Talmud say kicked off the events of Tisha B'Av, at least one of the times, and the destruction of the Second Temple took place due to the fact that somebody felt that the rabbis didn't speak up when they should have. And that leads to the question: when should we talk about when should we butt into a conversation that someone else is having, or a problem we see in the world, or a wrong we see, and try and share something. So to that extent, I'm going to share what I have over here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, and we can discuss and figure out how we want to apply it. It definitely, just a final note from the Jewish point of view, secular matters in terms of damages and problems you might see between one person and another, interhuman issues and religious issues between one person and God, or so to speak, are intertwined. That while they have different laws pertaining to them, they're very much part of one whole. So you're going to see throughout this, there's this kind of back and forth between if it's someone not doing something religiously versus someone doing something wrong, in terms of what they do to another person. I think there's merit to exploring that in its own right, and I think beyond that also, there's space to kind of see that even, some of the greater social issues we have today, how you want to try and apply it and extrapolate it, each person according to their own understanding, how they see it. But in any event, when is it necessary to speak up? So the foundational story over here is from the Talmud, Tractate Gittin. It's a tract that speaks about divorce, of all things. But in this case, this is a story about how the Second Temple was destroyed and Jerusalem was leveled. So it says, it happened this way. A certain man had a friend named Kamsa. We're going to have to keep track of these names. And an enemy called Bar Kamsa. Kamsa and Bar Kamsa might mean Kamsa is the person and Bar Kamsa is his son. Bar meaning son in Aramaic. Or they could just be one person named Kamsa and another person who's called the son of Kamsa with no relation. There's a debate in the commentaries who these two people were. So this person once made a party and said to his servant, go and bring Kamsa. The man went and brought Bar Kamsa. He brought the wrong person. Instead of bringing his friend, his buddy, he brought his enemy. So when the man who gave the party found Bar Kamsa there, he said, see, you are my enemy. What are you doing here? Get out. Said the other. So Bar Kamsa said, since I'm already here, let me stay, and I'll pay you for whatever I eat and drink. You don't need to kick me out. You don't need to embarrass me. Everyone's watching. Everyone sees me. I got dressed up. Let me enjoy the meal, and I'll pay my ticket. So he said, absolutely not. Get out. Then let me give half the cost of the party. He offered to pay at least half the cost. Nope, the host refused. Then let me pay for the whole party. Still the host refused and took him by the hand and threw him out. He let him out of the building. Said Bar Kamsa, since the rabbis were sitting there and did not stop him, this shows that they agreed with him. I will go and inform against them to the government. At the time, Jerusalem and Israel was a vassal state of the Roman Empire, so I'm going to go tell the Romans that something's going on. So he went and he said to the emperor, the Jews are rebelling against you, and this kicked off the event that led to the destruction of Jerusalem. So this story has been addressed a lot of people look into it, and one of the questions is, how it deals with what's called in Hebrew lashon hara, gossip, ill speech about someone else, and other issues in terms of seeing something wrong. And I think in our case, the question is, the rabbis didn't speak up. How should you speak up if you see something wrong? If you see an injustice going in front of you, how should you tell the person who's doing that misdeed to correct it? So first of all, the question is, what's the big deal? He was embarrassed. We all get embarrassed. I mean, someone, especially social media today, someone puts up a picture of you, on Facebook when you're in high school and you look, ridiculous, and I can't believe they tagged me in that, and people say things. I mean, what's the big deal about embarrassment? So from a Jewish point of view, embarrassment is actually a very big deal. So Rabbi Elazar of Modin would say, one who humiliates his friend in public, although he, the one who's humiliating, possesses Torah and knowledge and good deeds, this person is, has it all. He has no share in the world to come. That person has forfeited their share in the world to come, which is a very extreme punishment by Jewish standards. Meaning that even if there's no physical corporal punishment, because it's not an action, so to speak, it's a, you humiliated someone through, kind of just saying something subtly, or it wasn't even something that could be punishable in terms of finding the person or anything like that. Nevertheless, he still has an obligation to not do it, and it's a very severe issue for humiliating someone. So when it comes to the idea of speaking up, and throughout this talk you'll see that the words speak up and rebuke are kind of used interchangeably depending on the translation I worked with and the context of the verse, but in this sense we're all speaking about something that's a little bit more. It's not just rebuking someone, like shouting at someone randomly. It's about speaking up for what's right and letting someone know that they've done something wrong. So the Torah tells us in Leviticus and Vayikra, you shall surely rebuke your fellow, and you shall not bear inequity for him. This is a two-part thing. The one, there's an obligation, you really need to make sure to rebuke someone doing something wrong. The other thing is you shouldn't do sin against him, as we'll see what that means. So the reality is rebuke is a complex mitzvah. It's not a very simple thing to go ahead and say that you're going to tell someone off for something they did that's wrong. It's complex personally, but as well, the question is, will it be received properly? Will it be properly understood? So Rabbi Tarfon said in the Talmud, I would be surprised if there's anyone in this generation who can receive rebuke. And this is 1,500 years ago. Already then he said, something, no one is fit to be told that they need to correct their ways. Why? Because if the one rebuking says to him, remove the splinter from between your eyes, the other says to him, remove the beam from between your eyes. That if you're going to tell somebody, hey, there's something a little bit off about what you did over there, you could have been nice to that person, you could have done this differently, you're going to say something small, they're going to go ahead and point out that you have a massive beam, you have a big issue, it's not just a splinter, there's something critically wrong with your character. And therefore, Rabbi Tarfon said that no person was able to properly receive rebuke. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, I would be surprised if there's anyone in the generation who knows how to rebuke, that no person knows how today to go about telling someone they did something wrong without mixing in personal agendas or anger or embarrassing the person. And therefore, from both sides, we see it's a very fraught concept about how to go out and how to speak someone out. It's never comfortable or easy to correct a person. It's very easy, I think, to post something online, I'd say, because then there's no human involved. But when you have to tell someone to their face, it becomes a much more difficult thing. So now that we kind of have the underpinnings of the background behind this, let's take a look at the commandments. It's actually a mitzvah. It's an obligation that if you see something wrong, you have an obligation to tell someone. So the work we're going to be looking at is called the chinuch. It's a foundational work written by a Spanish sage in 13th century Barcelona. It's anonymous. We don't know who it is. There are a couple people who kind of theorize because he was from the tribe of Levi, and his name might have been Aaron. So a couple people, they say it's this guy, it's that guy. But in the event, it's a very important anonymous work written by a rabbi really for his kids. They felt the Shabbat afternoon, he wanted to go over everything they'd learned and they heard in the synagogue and be able to explain why we do everything we do. So he made this sefer called Chinuch, which means education. The Chinuch writes, we are commanded to rebuke a fellow Jew. And the commentaries say this is also in the context of, with the non-Jews as well, but we're focusing right now within the context of a Jewish community, who does not behave properly, whether about things that are between one person and another, or between a person and the omnipresent, as it's stated in Leviticus with the verse that we just had beforehand. So really, there are, as we're going to see, there are two types of issues that express themselves in two different types of ways. You have those misdeeds which are private, where no one sees it besides the person who witnessed it, and those misdeeds or those wrongs that we see in the world that are public in front of everybody. And then you have those that are between one person and another, interhuman issues. You have interhuman issues, and then on the other hand, we have the issues between one person and their creator, the omnipresent God who's everywhere. And the sages say in Sifra, which is a midrashic work, from where do we know that if you rebuke someone 4 or 5 times and the person did not return, they didn't stop doing it. You told someone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, they really listen, what you're doing right now, it's problematic, it's not right, you have to stop this. So you're obligated to go back and rebuke again. Hence we learn you shall surely rebuke. The fact that the Torah says surely, it doubles over and in Hebrew repeats the phrase, you really gotta do this, that then at that point in time, it means that even 4 or 5 times. The sages said in the Talmud, you shall surely rebuke even 100 times. That at whatever cost, whatever it takes, if you see someone doing something wrong, then you have to let them know. And you can't just, so to speak, feel you did your obligation by saying it once, or you did something, whatever it is, there's a problem you see in the world, you have to go out and you have to speak out against it. So then the question is the other side, that if you're doing it, then maybe you should just scream at the person and unload on them and just, really let them know how bad they are. So the Sifra, in the same work, perhaps he should rebuke until he embarrasses the person, literally changes the color in the person's face. Which is an interesting thing in Hebrew, that the idea is when you embarrass someone, it's hamalben pnei chavere, you cause their face to go white, because first the person flushes when they're embarrassed, and then the color kind of drains from their face. So maybe you should do it to the point you embarrass the person. The verse concludes, and you shall not bear sin for him. You shouldn't do any wrongdoings against this person. This teaches that at the beginning of the rebuke, it's fitting for the person to rebuke privately, with soft expressions and calm words, so it doesn't embarrass him. There's no doubt that if he does not return from his ways, we shall call the transgressor in public. So that really, when you begin with, and you see something wrong, the ability to, call someone over personally, pick up the phone and call them, slide into their DMs, whatever it is, in a way that will be received properly by the person, which is critical. At that point in time, that's how you should begin the conversation. When you go out and you confront someone right away in public, in front of everybody, especially for something that was private, but even if it's something that's public, often they're not ready and willing to receive it. And that if you really want to be able to tell someone that something needs to be corrected and there's something wrong, or there's something that was, that was a problem that should have been addressed, the best way to do it is to go about doing it in person first. Only then, if the person refuses to listen and they continue to do this thing, which is really problematic, then at that point in time, is there a place to bring it up in public and let people know. We're going to kind of get into some of this as well. It's also just important to note that all of this is speaking about issues that aren't an immediate threat. If someone is threatened in body or in soul, it's a whole different, in spirit or mind, so to speak, it's a whole different thing. We're talking about when you see a problem which won't bring anyone direct, major harm, and perhaps the level of financial loss or other types of embarrassment, things like that. So why is it that we have this obligation? It's kind of a strange thing, if you think about it, to be told that in Judaism there's this concept to rebuke people. I mean, do you have to go around and look for people to rebuke? No, it's something only if you witness something or see something. But the point is, why does this obligation exist? So the chinuch gives what I think is a very interesting reason. So it's from the root of this commandment is because there is peace and goodness between people with this. So the reality is the Torah, Judaism says we all have to get along. We have to be able to work together. We have to be able to share something positive and share space together and be able to exist as a community, as people as a whole, as members of this earth. And therefore, so when a person sins to another person and he rebukes him privately, he'll apologize in front of him, and the other will accept his apology and he'll be whole with him. Meaning that if you're able to tell someone, hey, I saw you doing something over here, and it caused me damage financially, physically, emotionally, whatever it is, and you tell that person the wrong that you saw, and you say it in the way that the other person receives it, and they apologize, at that point in time, you're going to be able to act positively around them. That you're no longer going to be having this experience where you're going to have something against them, but rather it's going to be a chance to make right with them and to be able to exist together. But if you don't rebuke them, if you don't tell the person that what you saw was a problem, that what you saw was problematic, then you're going to loathe them in your heart and injure the person at this time or some other point in time. You're going to bear a grudge against someone. I think about myself once. Somebody once took something of mine by accident, and I never actually told them. They just, a couple of weeks later, I found it again. It was my tefillin which is an expensive sacred object, and it disappeared. And for like 2 days, I was looking for it, and I just saw it one day on a table. And I never actually told the person that hey, you took this by mistake. I realized I figured out who it was or whatever it is. But like from now on, whenever I see the person, it's always in the back of my mind. That's the guy that took the thing. But sometimes when you're able to tell someone in a way that will be received, in a way that will be understood, in a way that is menschlich, as they say in Yiddish, in a way that the person is willing to receive it, then at a point in time you're never going to have that in the back of your mind. And I've never done it with this person. I'm just thinking this idea that when you're able to, you have that catharsis of letting someone know that they did something wrong and they're able to apologize, then it allows human beings to work with each other. So that's on one side. That's in terms of your relationship with the other person. This is from the Chinuch. There's a major commentary on the Chinuch called the Minchas Chinuch. More than just commentary, kind of uses the Chinuch as a launching ground to discuss all kinds of other interesting topics. So he says, it would seem to me, there's another reason to call out a person who does something wrong. And that's from the precept, not stand idly by the blood of your fellow. You shouldn't, if somebody is suffering, if someone is hurting, if someone is in danger, you have an obligation to step up and to help them. But just as if you were to witness someone drowning, you need to save them. How much more so if you can prevent someone from doing something wrong, which is a spiritual harm or harm to another person, so you should help them as well. You should stop them as well. And therefore, the idea of telling someone that, speaking up and letting someone know that you see something is wrong, is not just a good for you, that you're able to exist as a person in this world without having grudges against other people. It's good for the other person as well, because at that point in time, now they can also act properly. So the question is, how do you go about rebuking? Now that we've said this idea that there's even there's a mitzvah, there's a commandment, an obligation as human beings to speak up when we see something wrong, to let people know that there's an issue, how do we go about doing it? So at first, a person admonishes one's fellow should not speak to them harshly until he becomes embarrassed. For it's forbidden for a person to embarrass a fellow Jew. How much more so it's forbidden to embarrass a person in public. So really, this is from Maimonides. Maimonides, speaking about this, said that really you have to make sure to keep it quiet, to go to the person directly and speak to them directly and not bring it to the forefront. Therefore, a person should be careful not to embarrass one's fellow, whether of great or lesser stature. It doesn't matter who it is. The person could be, obviously if the person is both sides. If the person is greater than you, you might say this person, that's a great sage from a Jewish point of view, or, a public official, or someone big, someone who has a lot of money or power or influence. How could I embarrass them? No, if they're doing something wrong, you should point it out in a way they'll be received. And also someone from lesser stature, you might say, maybe this person is below me, beneath me. Why does this person need to be corrected? Just let them, whoever wants to go and do wrong, let them do wrong, or, a child, whatever it is. No, we have an obligation in the right way not to embarrass anyone in public, and not to call them a name that embarrasses them, which is a whole separate interesting thing to kind of figure out and explore this idea that if someone doesn't want to be called by a certain name, a nickname, or whatever it is, you shouldn't call them by that, or to relate the matter that brings shame in that person's presence. So when does the above apply? And Maimonides has a caveat. In regards to matters between one person and another, that when it comes to interpersonal things, then at that point in time, someone has an ox which keeps on, walking into my field. Let's use a past example. I don't know what a current one would be. Someone is causing me some sort of annoyance, problem, financial damage on a minor extent that you can't, take them to small claims court, whatever it is. At that point in time, you go to them quietly. However, in regards to spiritual matters, the transgressor does not repent in private, then it should be brought to the public and it should be publicized. I don't want to go into what that means today, since I think a lot of this has to deal with the way the world looked at the times of Maimonides, the times of the Talmud, when social structures were very different. And we'll see that this definitely doesn't apply today in the sense of like going up to someone and saying, you're not religious enough. I'm not referring to that at all. But in any event, when it comes to those things which are on a greater level of greater importance, like between a person and God, which, so to speak, is called Chil Hashem in Hebrew, which is considered, embarrassing, taking the divine name and making it mundane and things like that. At that point in time, when it's a greater issue, it can be brought into the public if it's not, if the person is not going to repent privately. Repent meaning make well and do what's right. So Minchas Chinuch speaks about this, and he says that in Tanakh you might think, right, when we're speaking, we have public and we have private, we have between people and between God. So it seems to see Maimonides is saying that when somebody does something wrong privately, you go to them privately. When someone does something wrong publicly, you go to them privately at first, and then you can bring it publicly. If someone does something wrong against God, so to speak, does something that's truly unethical in the greatest sense of it, at that point in time, you can bring it publicly and let other people know if that's what it takes. But private matters, it would seem to be that you always keep private. So the chinuch says that's not exactly the case. It would seem the difference that Maimonides and the chinuch, the work we cited previously, accord between interpersonal misdeeds, where it's forbidden to call someone out publicly, and those between a person and the creator, that they say that at that point in time you can't bring it publicly. That's only in regards to the person who has been wronged by someone else. That you should forgive the person. Who experienced it, but the person who experienced it should forgive the person. But if you see someone wronging someone else publicly, then at that point in time, since it's not about yourself, you're not reflecting on your own experience. You see one person do wrong to another person purely on a interpersonal, financial level, whatever it is, then obviously you have to call it out if the person doesn't stop. So all that is kind of a broad conceptual talk about when you see something wrong in the world and you want to correct it, how you go about doing it. If it's in person, definitely always start with the going to the person privately, and to not desist from it and keep on doing it. I didn't bring it here, but the Talmud says you should keep on doing it until they shout at you or threaten you and say, I'm going to give you a punch or whatever it is if you don't stop. Somehow you have to bring it to the point where the person really is, you've done everything you could. And if that doesn't desist, then there are times when you can make it public and other people know as well. And again, all this is speaking about when there's no imminent harm. If someone is actually a bad actor that is causing serious, mental or financial or bodily harm to other people, that's a whole different discussion as well. This is about someone makes a mistake in front of you and you want to let them know. So there's an interesting rule that we see about Yom Kippur coming up, which is indeed coming up on the calendar, that speaks about one of the lesser-known commandments of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, we're supposed to apologize to other people, we're supposed to make right with ourselves, we make right with God, you're supposed to fast, everyone knows, but really, technically, you're supposed to start the fast a little bit early. You're supposed to start the fast 5-10 minutes early, whatever it is. You don't wait for the last second. It's an obligation to take the holiness and sanctity of Yom Kippur. Tisha B'Av is a sad day, but Yom Kippur is a happy day. It's considered to take the sanctity of that moment and schlep it in and bring it in a little bit into the weekday by starting the fast a little early. So what happens if some people, freak out and they're just busy eating everything they can until the very last second, and they don't go ahead and bring in this little extra bit of holiness? What should you do if you see someone? There's a family member, someone else you see. You find that there's someone who's going and just eating to the very last second. Should you tell them off for not doing this? So the Code of Jewish Law, this is as written in the Shulchan Aruch by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, says people who eat and drink until the actual beginning of Yom Kippur, they go to the very last second possible, unaware that it's a mitzvah to add time from the mundane realm to the realm of holiness, to start the fast a little bit earlier. If one is certain that his warnings will not be heeded and they'll continue willfully, you should not reprimand them. Because better they transgress unknowingly than knowingly, which is a very interesting rule. Normally speaking, we just said until now, you see someone wrong, you should tell them, you should let them know there's something wrong. But there's definitely a time when you see, something, if in this matter the person won't listen, then at that point in time, you just let them go ahead and keep on doing what they're doing, because you don't want to tell them they're doing something wrong and they'll keep on doing it anywhere. So when does this apply? This principle applies to all prohibitions that are not explicitly stated in the Torah. Speaking about those types of things, even if they are biblical commandments, it's not a red letter thing, line and verse you can point and say, do this. If something is major, someone is kidnapping someone else, that's a whole different thing. Maybe it should be lesser damages or whatever it is. Someone's doing something, that's really explicit, then you could say, hey, just so you know, do this. But if it's something that's not clear, not explicitly known by the masses, at that point in time, there are times when you could say, if they're not going to listen and they're not going to take it seriously, then you should not tell them. So what if that's for big things? So that's for unknown things. What about known things? With regards to, this is continuing there, with regards to prohibition explicitly stated in the Torah, by contrast, when it's obligated to reprimand a transgressor, even if one knows that he will not accept the rebuke when he's informed of the prohibition. The rationale of it is that all Jewish people are responsible for each other. And by reprimanding the transgressor, by telling the person, calling them out, letting them know, hey, you're doing something wrong, one frees himself of this liability, you have an obligation. We're all in this together, and if someone is doing something wrong, you need to tell them. Nevertheless, one should not reprimand someone publicly more than once. One should not repeatedly reprimand the transgressor publicly once he is certain the transgressor will not accept his rebuke. At that point in time, you say that it's just as a mitzvah to say something that will be heeded, so too is a mitzvah not to say something that will not be heeded, like we said previously. And in private, you continue to go to the person even 100 times until the person says, that's it, give me a break, I've had enough. So until here is kind of the legalistic approach. I'd like to share both a kind of a spiritual understanding of what it means to give rebuke, from a kind of a higher spiritual level. Then after that, we're going to return to our story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa and take a look at some lessons we can learn from it as well. And then we can have the questions and answers. So, concerning the injunction, you should repeatedly rebuke your friends. We've been speaking about until now. You should surely tell someone that they're doing something wrong, call them out. The word used here in Hebrew is amisecha, is your fellow, meaning that there's a Talmudic way of breaking it apart. So am she'ibcha, that the person who is with you, on par with you in Torah mitzvahs, who nevertheless is not repentant. You're speaking about somebody who's on your level. This is you have to go and let someone really know, hey, you're doing something wrong, you need to correct this, this is really problematic, and it shouldn't be this way. That's somebody who's your colleague, who's your peer, who you don't have unfair power over or advantage over or anything like that. But to someone who's not his companion, and that's not his equal, or even if this person is on your level, but you're not in intimate terms with them, it's not somebody it's not somebody who can come to as a friend and say, hey, I saw you doing this, you should be aware. On the contrary of this situation, Hillel said, be the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace, loving the creatures. We'll explain why people are called creatures in a second, and drawing them near to the Torah. You have to bring someone in and show someone love and show someone respect. That the usage of the word creatures here means that if you sometimes you'll look at a person and you'll see that this person you're dealing with, I don't understand why this person, you don't see humanity in them. It can happen. I mean, that you could look at a person and just see that they have no other specialness than the fact that, this is somebody who God created, who God made here in this world. This is a holy human being that's next to me. So that's the reason why the person is called creatures, indicating that the fact that they're God's creation is the sole value. Even those people, someone who you can't see anything else redeeming about them, which I've never met such people, but I imagine someone could look at someone else to see that. After one must attract them with cords of love to really reach out to them. Perhaps one will be able, after all, to draw them close and to bring them together. And even if you go and you reach out to this person and something, you don't make an impact, you don't have that, you're unable to create a connection, nevertheless, there's an obligation to love every person as well. And so therefore, even if you weren't able to influence someone in a positive way, you still have the ability to, you haven't lost out because you've still shown them love. And so furthermore, it says, even those one is enjoined to hate. Sometimes you see someone, they're really doing something wrong, and you're really supposed to say, that's it. This person is out of the fold, it's completely wrong. That's only in terms of the wrong. But in terms of the good that they do, then the love for them exists as well. And if you have to live with this contradiction, that you see somebody who's doing something wrong and it's problematic and you want them to address it, at the same time, in terms of the good that they do in this world, you have to love them as well. So in any event, a final return to the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa that kicked off this whole discussion. There's something very interesting we see about this. Why? This is from the Maharal, the great sage in Prague. So one should contemplate, what exactly did Kamsa do wrong? That the sages say because of Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. You look at the story. You have this guy Kamsa, who was invited to a party. He never even got the invitation. He never even showed up. He never even came there. And yet, because of and the invitation went to Bar Kamsa, went to this other person, or his son, or whoever it is, went to this other person who went there, and that guy is the one who actually was involved in the events. Why do we say because of Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed? It would seem that Kamsa had nothing to do with any of this. He was, a bystander that was never even invited to the party. So why do we say it's his fault? So really, there's a lesson over here, and there's a reason also, if you think about it, the guy who was actually the bully in the story, the host of the party, he's not even mentioned. His name is not even there. So the very fact that we focus on the names Kamsa and Bar Kamsa is because of these names. Either they're their actual names, and the sages were able to learn a lesson from them, or these are just names that the sages gave them, so to speak, pseudonyms, to understand the ethical problems they presented. We say that the reason the temple was destroyed was due to baseless hatred and disagreement of that generation. So it's the nature of baseless hatred to love certain specific people and thus hate others. When you speak about when you're biased against other people, it means you say, this is the in-group. This is the type of person that I like. This is the person I want to focus on and direct all my love for. This is the Kamsa person. And then you have the person that, by nature of the fact that your love for this specific group is relegated to what makes them unique, you're going to dislike the other person, or the other way around, because you dislike this group of people, that person you do like. That when you have that type of hatred, that's the type of destructive hatred that we're speaking about. And this is hinted in the names of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. That in Hebrew, Kamsa there's a Hebrew letter, the vowel kamatz, which looks like two dots over there. No, kamatz is like that. Sorry, but it looks like a series of kind of shapes that are kind of clumped together. Or idea of kamatz represents pieces and drops. The point is that it shows on division and focusing one side over the other. So the names Kamsa and Bar Kamsa suggests division and discrimination, to separate and love one group while specifically hating another. Thus, the two individuals in this story suggest to us these two expressions of hatred, of specifically loving one group over another, and also of hating other people. And therefore, there's a final lesson for that. So the exile, something the Rebbe said in 1989, that exile can exist in two states: a physical displacement from the land and a spiritual disassociation from the soul. And these two states can be found in the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. This person, Bar Kamsa, was physically banished from the table, and therefore you had physical destruction. And then it was due to the spiritual disassociation that the host was unable to find love for Bar Kamsa, and therefore, because of that, and that lack of love, there's the spiritual lack of, issues that we experience. And thus, we can rectify the state of displacement by increasing in love for others. That if we know that the reason why this destruction of Tisha B'Av happened was because of the selective love we had for people and not the true love for every person, what makes them unique and special, then we could fix the situation by having love for other people, even if there's a need to rebuke them, to do it properly, and through that we can come and have peace for everyone. So, in any event, that is this talk over here. I'd love to hear your thoughts, ideas, questions, complaints, whatever it is, as I tried to kind of gather various things that I thought were interesting about Tisha B'Av. And also, this is Tech Tribe. If you want to follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, our newsletter, and on the site, and things like that. But this was a lot of fun, and I look forward to hopefully being able to do some more in person. But I'd like to hear from you guys. So let's.
I'm gonna try and fast this year. What typically are we supposed to do on the day? Like, should there be no joy? Like, what's the theme?
Right. So it's definitely a day. You're supposed to fast. There's various other things. You don't wear shoes. You can wear like rubber shoes or Crocs or something like that. According to most people, that's fine. You shouldn't engage in like really like exciting, fun activities, right? So like going on a pleasure stroll or something like that on a hike. I wouldn't recommend doing that with this heat anyway. Even when you greet people, you're supposed to theoretically, if you're with other people in a shul setting, walk up and say hello. And if someone walks up to you on the street and doesn't know you, says hi, you don't go, oh, I can't talk to you. I mean, you're just supposed to have a little bit more, of a somber day. People don't study Torah because Torah is considered to be the source of joy in our life. Besides those things which are serious about the destruction, this story over here about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa really kicks off several interesting pages in the tractate Gittin. It's Perek Nezakin. It's a lot of people study that. There's a lot of very interesting stories and very sad stories, tragic stories about the destruction during the times of the destruction of the Second Temple. People have talks about various other tragic events in history. It's the unfortunate thing. It's important to remember these things. Unfortunately, the thing is, people kind of look at this and they go, "Oh, well, Judaism is always about Holocaust, Crusades, destruction, whatever." But it's to kind of focus on those points in our history that need rectification, and to think about also about the way we can better have love for other people and better integrate ourselves with other people and have true respect and that's needed at this time. So Tisha B'Av itself is not a biblical holiday. It's mentioned by the sages. So it's of the highest level of rabbinic obligations. But it's considered a serious fast. There's some fasts where they say, like, you have a headache, you're not feeling so well, just take an Advil and then you can eat something, whatever it is. For Tisha B'Av, it's a much more stringent fast. So if you, like, for whatever reason, there are very valid reasons why someone has to break the fast. But you should definitely consult with a rabbi, the doctor, obviously, doctor as well. But I'm saying about when you wouldn't. But it's like the highest level of rabbinic commandment.
Well, I have a question. So
Sure.
I think the topic is very interesting in modern times to think about like written rebukes, like in the press or on Twitter or something like that, right? What does Judaism have to say about that?
Right. Without kind of going, this is something when I was preparing to kind of look at this as well, and just opened up like a whole other avenue of topics I felt would like balloon past the amount of time. But in terms of the written word is considered more serious to a certain degree than something spoken. On one hand, when you say something, so the impact you leave on the other person is permanent, right? You tell someone off, you hurt someone's feelings, you say something not nice, it may be gone for you, but for them, they may live with it the rest of their life, right? On the other hand, it doesn't have any clear reminder that it still exists, as opposed to the written word. When something's written, something's online, it's forever, right? So it lives on, and no matter how many times you try and delete it or whatever it is, there's going to be a screen grab someone took of it, and it's still going to be there, and it's still going to exist. Embarrassing someone on social media is considered to be something done in public, even though there's kind of a difference in Jewish law. If embarrassing someone is considered if you're embarrassing someone in private, or if you embarrass someone, if it's considered in public, and also if you catch someone doing something wrong, if it's in private versus public. Social media would seem to be public, no matter what form it is or what setting it is. Ultimately, you're going to consider this to be a public issue, and therefore it has that kind of severity. When you embarrass someone in public, it's so much worse, and that would be the case when you kind of tell someone off. I will say this. Actually, I mean, there's an interesting story which I've tried to apply to my own social media use. That like I'm a rabbi and I'm on Twitter and like I have a blue check, so like people take it seriously. And one time every now and then, like you see someone and someone says something that would be considered anti-Semitic, right? Now, I'm not telling you the person is an anti-Semite. That's a key difference, because you have trolls that are bad actors out there to try and harass you. If you see someone saying something, it's like that's not right. That's problematic, as they say. This person should be aware of the issue. So I used to be, I'd go, I'm going to reply to them, publicly or whatever. And even if I try to say it in a respectful way, what happens when we apply like that? Someone immediately gets on the defense, right? Because you're calling them out. You're saying, how could you say this? Especially about, some sort of complex topic, whatever it is. And they get all, upset and flustered, and they double down, then you double down. And because Twitter is, God bless Twitter, is so public in that way that other people start coming in, everyone's drawn to the conversation, and suddenly you have, a whole, issue going on with a bunch of people, and it's all in the public. And I've never seen that many changes. Even when somebody changes, it doesn't always work so well. It doesn't. Normally, one person ends up blocking the other person, and that's it. Doesn't end well. Something I've tried doing, and it's the right person takes the right touch. There's is to send the person a DM and say, hey, I know it's kind of weird. I'm sending this message unprompted, but I saw something and I wanted to share it with you, and I'm sending it to you privately because in good faith, I know you meant well and you wanted to come about this in the best way, but here's why I thought it's a problem. Do you want to discuss? And the results have been very, very different in terms of being able to reach someone and being able to actually have a conversation where even if the person doesn't agree with you, you have more of that, a better understanding than you do if you kind of do it publicly, which was interesting. To actually later on saw the Lubavitcher Rebbe was speaking about the need to help the Russian Jewry. At the time of the Soviet Union, it was a very difficult time, and there were public protests and there were private protests. The question, how should you go about doing it? So, touching geopolitics a little bit, the Rebbe said there was an interesting case with the president of France. His name was Pompidou, and he'd come to America, and he'd done something which was considered anti-Israel and that's anti-Semitic, and people were going out there and really, screaming at him and protesting and whatever. And so he doubled down on his position. And the Rebbe said that had they gone to him privately, sometimes you go to a person, the person may know you dislike them, or you have an issue with them, or you think they did this wrong. But if you go to a person like a mensch, like, you go to a person not in a kind of personal, upfront way and say, hey, this was the issue over here, then the person is more receptive to hearing what you have to say than when you call them out publicly and then immediately kind of, double down on what they had to say, and there's no conversation. So without any particular, subject matter, I think it's a useful thing in general to be able to tell someone, to pick up the phone and give them a call, whatever it is, or to have a cup of coffee, to meet with someone in person. It ends up being a lot better in my experience.
I guess going off of that, I kind of have a follow-up question.
Sure.
So I know we were talking about just like it's a mitzvah to not rebuke people if you think they're not gonna listen to you per se. So like, how would you think about that in terms of like people who are online and just like saying things and you think it might be a lost cause, but like, would you still think it's worth reaching out to them, like you're mentioning anyways, or like, how do you kind of like balance those two things?
So I think for me, it would be a question of if the person, you could listen online, you can sometimes tell when a person's a troll. I mean, I saw once two people who happened to know, each one was telling the other person they were a Russian bot. So, but like generally speaking, you can tell if a person has like an actual presence online, they're actually posting regularly, and you see that they're not there just to get a rise out of other people and to act as trolls, then I would say definitely it makes sense to reach out to them. If a person is there truly maliciously, then yeah, just, block them, move on. Like, I mean, I will say something sometimes if I feel like, especially if someone else gets drawn, like, will tag me on Twitter and go like, hey, Rabbi, we have to say to this person, like, this person clearly is a neo-Nazi, that's just, or some kid that wants to pretend to be one or whatever. Like, but like, so I'll say something just because I think it needs to be said. But overall, yeah, I think that's definitely a case where you'd go like, this is, not worth it to do it because they're going to keep on doing it anyway. So there's no need to engage, especially if it causes, I think, a toll on yourself and you begin to feel dragged down into the negativity. All right. So I would say then, if no other questions, keeping within our 2:45 stop. It's been a lot of fun talking about something not so fun. But hopefully we could have some more great experiences, especially together. To be in the room is amazing. And may each and every one of us add in a little bit of good. They say the Maimonides we mentioned beforehand says you should view the world as a perfectly balanced scale. That's half good and half not good. And your one good deed, that one good thing, that positive energy you can put in the world, that one thing more can tip the balance of the scale and bring blessings and deliverance and salvation and goodness to each and every one of us. So we should do that one more deed. We shouldn't have to fast Tisha B'Av. It should be good things for each and every one of us. So, Chaim.